host, Miss Brenda, and I will be your host for the next 2 hours for Freedom at Hand. So thank you so much for taking the time out on this Sunday afternoon to sit back, relax, and enjoy a couple hours of this. Today will be some of American history. I wanted to mention a couple of things before I get going here. Again, thank you so much for making me a part of your Sundays. I've enjoyed bringing this to you, and from the amount of listeners that we've had on the show, I can tell that it's something that has been informative and that you've enjoyed. Please feel free, like I always say before the show starts, to call in if you have any comments or anything that you'd like to bring to the discussion. One of the things I do like when we get callers to call in is that, you know, it opens up it opens it up more so we can have a broader and a bigger conversation about what it is we're talking about or whatever it is that's going on. So thank you so much for being a part of it today. You know, I have to say, I know and hope most of you have seen the video that came out on Taylor Crass, the American journalist that got arrested there in Uganda for shooting footage of things that were happening there with the rioting there. You know, it's like I've been telling you since I started with the American Connection and here on Freedom at Hand. Once we get on board and we start to know what's going on in that country, we will spread the events of what's happening in Uganda like a wildfire. But it isn't just our fight. For the Ugandans that are outside of the country in exile, and those of you that are citizens wherever it is you may be living, and for the Ugandans that are inside the country, it's not our fight, but we're willing to put our lives on the line to make sure that your voices are heard. It's just like Charlie was saying before on his show, we can't do it by ourselves, but, you know, we're here. So we don't want you to be silent. This is not a time to be silent anymore. One of the reasons for Freedom at Hand is to put a platform out there to show you other heroic, iconic leaders that faced their fear head on, but yet went forward to make a change for their lives, for their country, and for their families. This is the same thing we're asking of the Ugandan family right now, whether you're inside of Uganda or outside. And let me say this for those that are outside of Uganda. We have no rights to sit back and allow what's happening in Uganda to happen. We can no longer be silent about the violence that's going on there in Uganda to your fellow family members and the citizens of Uganda, because silence doesn't help anyone. And your family may not be involved, you know, on the front line, but eventually it will involve your family and everybody else's families that are there in Uganda, because there's no way you cannot tell me that no family member can walk down the streets of Uganda without a threat of police violence, tear gassing, beatings, or whatever's happening on the streets, because from some of the videos that we've seen, some of these people that this is happening to are innocent bystanders that just got caught in the crossfire. Your family may not be caught in the crossfire today, but your family will be eventually caught in the crossfire. Because let us not forget the history of Uganda and what has happened in the past. And to sit back and think that that would never happen again, we can't do that. Not at the luxury and the expense of other people's lives. We cannot do that. So I like the Charlie, the program that was on before me, and some of the other programs that have been on, we've all pledged to pay $50 a month to the cause because it's important to us. You know, we're not asking anyone to do anything that we ourselves are not doing. It's important, and it's important for a reason. So the video that came out with Taylor was just a prime example for Ugandans inside the walls of Uganda and outside to know that this is no longer going to be kept in silence. And to the sitting president and parliament and all of the high officials there in Uganda, to think that you're going to be able to sit back with your arms folded and just watch this play out, it's not going to happen, because we will make our voices heard. And the more we get exposure here in the United States and other areas throughout the world, the more we will expose what's going on there, and you will have to answer the questions. And we will look at Parliament just like we will look at the president to say what is going on and why is this happening in this country, a country that states in its constitution that freedom and justice and right for all the people there. This is not what's happening. Our senator, our Delaware senator, was just there in Uganda, Chris Coons. And I thank him so much. I sent him an email, and I hope to be talking with some of his colleagues soon. Sometimes it's very hard to get in touch with our senators, but they have liaisons that work underneath them that, hopefully we can get one of them on the program just to talk a little bit about Senator Coons and some of the comments that he has made there in Uganda. Simply on the erosion. That's the way he looked at the situation in Uganda, an erosion of freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of press, the freedom to protest and assemble, to have assemblies. The needless crimes that are happening to people just because these are their civil rights, which the Ugandan government says that they have. Yet our senator, the senator of Delaware here in the United States of America, called it a state of corrosion, a corrosion of the freedom of the people, the freedom of the press, the freedom of speech, protest, and the freedom to assemble. Charlie was just talking about it on his show a little, and even the caller that called in and commented on it some. You cannot, assembly has to be something that's the right of the people. Law and order is just that. It's for law and order. It is not to send the army in to kill and brutalize and harm the people that are forming an assembly. I find it very, very interesting that right now Uganda is starting to get more and more attention. And this is why this is not a time to be silent. Those of you outside of the country and those of you that are inside the country, it's not a time of being silent. Now that you have the ball rolling and you have Americans that are getting involved and getting put on the news, and these videos are being put out there for everybody to view, we want the world to know what is happening to our sisters and brothers there in Uganda. And you as Ugandan citizens and those of you that are inside of the country, you should want this more than the Americans want it. Like I said, it's not our fight, but we are willing to stand behind you, and we are willing to put our faces out there to say this is what's going on, and these are some of the things that we need to do to help the Ugandan people. So I feel very honored today as an American with my programs that come on, with Senator Chris Coons that just made these accusations against the sitting president there, for Taylor Crass, who just was jailed there in Uganda for trying to shoot footage on the riots and what's going on there so that we can get these videos out so that the American public will know what's going on. My friends, this is no longer a quiet fight. It has been quiet for too long. It has been quiet in the walls of Uganda, and now we can no longer sit back and allow this fight to be silent. We have to get on board, and we have to get on board however we can to make sure that the voices of the Ugandan people are heard. Charlie talked a little bit about the organization that's being formed, FADU. Let me explain to you. When we talked about Nelson Mandela on Freedom at Hand, and we talked about some of the things that he set up to organize the people, Stephen Biko did the same thing. He set up things to organize the people. Here in America, we did the same thing, and ours was called to organize the people. Ours was the NAACP. The NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And that organization stands as a whole. There is not one African American that you would talk to that is not aware of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which we call the NAACP. It's set there so it makes us strong. It makes us whole. It's there to protect our rights. And it makes awareness to our government and to our people and through its website and through the media when something goes wrong. The first thing that happens when something goes wrong that went terribly wrong to an African American here in the United States, the NAACP gets on board to investigate it, to figure out what's happened, if our rights have been violated, what the law states, and how we need to move forward as a people. That's why it's called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And that advancement means that we need to continue to grow and we need to continue to move forward. Yes, we've overcome a lot of things in this country, but to sit back and think that it's over, we can't do that. FADU, which we're setting up here at the Voice of Uganda Radio, is that organization, just like the NAACP. The FADU, F-A-D-D-U, the Alliance for Democracy and Development in Uganda, we need to have these things set in place because everybody, whether you're inside Uganda or outside Uganda, needs to have a place to go for safety, to know that this is our safety net. This is what we're building. We're standing behind this organization to move Uganda forward. Nelson Mandela knew he had to do it for apartheid to work. Stephen Biko followed right up behind him after Mandela was sentenced on Robben Island. When Stephen Biko came up, he started a foundation that he knew needed to move everything forward. We here as colored people who are now considered African Americans, we knew we had to set up something also, which was the NAACP. Now the Voice of Uganda Radio is asking all the Ugandans outside of the country and those who are inside the country to get on board. And we're telling you, FADU, F-A-D-D-U, can be just as big as Nelson Mandela's program he set up, Stephen Biko's program he set up, the programs that were set up in the programs that were set up in India, and here in America, the NAACP. You have to have a place where the people can go and know that their voice is heard. We have to have rights to be able to, if we wanted to go to Congress, Chris Coons right now, and say, this is what's happening, we need to know what we need to do or how we can lobby this or how we can get on the news or how we can make the media aware of what's going on, they're going to say, who are you? And we have a name to tell them who we are, and we will stand behind that. So please get on board. This is a time of movement. This is a time of change. This is a time of coming together as a family. This is a time of uniting ourselves together. Nothing starts out without the reasoning of everyone questioning things. But this is not a time of questioning because I've given you the other examples from South Africa to here in U.S., why these organizations have to be set up. Now, the NAACP, when people hear that, they go, oh, and they know what it's all about. And it makes them take a step back and evaluate what they're doing. That's what FADU will do for the Ugandan people. There in Uganda, as well as here in America, it will help us to establish ourselves so that we can move forward. And we don't establish ourselves as one, because none of the organizations that were set up were established for just the entity of themselves. They were established for the people. So later on, we will start to let you know where you can go out and read more. I know that websites are being built now and legal documentations are being done to set that all up. And as that starts to unfold, please remember what I'm saying to you now, so that you're not intimidated when the time comes to be a member of FADU, because that is where the power is going to come, and that is where the movement is going to come for a greater change in Uganda. I bring up the NAACP because my person today for Freedom at Hand is Rosa Parks. Now, a lot of you knew who Rosa Parks was because she came up during the time of Dr. Martin Luther King. She was the one who refused to give up her seat on a bus. And it started a civil rights movement that was bigger than any of the other civil rights movements that we had. Rosa Parks in 1955 was the secretary for the NAACP. And a part of her, well, you can understand what that means for her being the secretary of the NAACP. And that's the reason I'm bringing up FADU and the NAACP at this particular time with Rosa Parks, is because I want you to understand the power of the NAACP here in U.S., the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, And I also want you to understand how big FADDU, FADDU, the Federal Alliance for Democracy and Development in Uganda, I want you to understand how big this can be and what the impact is that it can have, and how it stands behind the people of Uganda, not me or someone else who has a program on Voice of Uganda Radio. Because this is not just, let me just say this before we get started with Rosa Parks here today. This radio station is just not somewhere for you to come and listen and be a part of a conversation of how people view and feel and think about things that are going on in Uganda, the changes that need to come about and what needs to happen. This program, the Voice of Uganda Radio, is about change. It's about time that we stop talking about the issues, stop talking about the problems, and start implementing and setting up the programs that are going to get the people in Uganda heard. I talked to you guys earlier about the video. We're working on a few other things, but it's almost ready to go. The video, the memorial videos that are going to come out. That memorial video is not only going to run on our website, but it's going to also run out there on YouTube. And the reason for these things, like we're saying here, the Voice of Uganda Radio, is to make awareness. We don't want you to just call in and complain. We don't want you to just call in and talk about what's going on in the country. We're talking about a movement. We're talking about a change that will advance all of us forward, especially the people of Uganda, because we're not on the front line. If you're outside of the country, you're not on the front line. Your life is not at stake. No one's going to be shooting at you or spraying you with tear gas or locking you up in jail or torturing you, because we're not there. But to our fellow Ugandans who are in Uganda and on the front line, I don't want not one day of their suffering, of their torturing, of the things that are going on in Uganda to go unnoticed. Not in this country, not in Canada, not in the UK, nowhere. Because we can no longer sit back and be silent about what's happening there. So please understand and please know that we have to get the videos out. We have to get the pictures out. We have to start an organization that we can all stand behind as one for the fighting of what needs to take place. We have to. Now, I'm going to go back a little bit into some of the history of Rosa Parks so that you can understand what era she came out of. Because I think a lot of times when people study Rosa Parks, they know, oh, she was a part of civil rights and the freedom movement in the U.S. because she refused to give up her seat on a bus. Well, let's go back a little farther than that. Rosa Parks was, once she was asked, who do you look up to? Who are role models in your life that you look up to? And the person that she chose as role model in her life were her parents and her grandparents, because her parents and her grandparents were born into slavery. So she knew firsthand from the experiences of her grandparents who were actually born into slavery. Her parents were on the cusp of slavery because at the time that they were small and growing up, the emancipation had not been signed into law yet. And it was a time where slavery had not been ended. Although a lot of things were changing, slavery had not yet ended. And so you have to understand that this is a child that was born in an era where her grandparents were slaves, and the torture and the fear and the anxieties that came with that for their own child, which was her mother, who was born at a time where we were on the cusp of slavery being abolished in the United States of America. So rights and liberties that her parents did not, Rosa Parks' mother did not have, her parents did not have because they were slaves, Rosa Parks' mother did have, which means that she was able to be educated and learn to read and learn a lot of the things that last Sunday when we talked about Harriet Tubman, when she came from an era where she still understood and knew that in slavery and the freedom of slaves, they didn't know how to read, they didn't know how to write. Most of them could not even identify their name. If you put their name in front of them, most of the time they were told to make their mark. Whenever they went to sign a document or do something, they said, well, make your mark. And their mark was an X. And that X meant that was the fact that they knew what they were doing and they knew what they were signing. So for her mother to be able to come out and become a teacher was really a very great and a very powerful thing. Now, one of the things I want you to understand that on the cusp of slavery, when slaves were free, there was still a lot of turmoil. There were groups that had been formed, the Ku Klux Klan, that were angry and frustrated at the government for freeing slaves. So they would hang and kill African Americans. They would torture. They took the law into their own hands. And because they were not identifiable, because most of the crimes that they prevented were at night when no one knew who they were, the spree of killings and the spree of just torturing people was still there. And it was very, very hard for the African Americans back then to, even though they were free, they really were not free, which is a lot of what we're experiencing right now with our brothers and sisters inside the walls of Uganda. Even though they're free, how free are they really? Because the fear is still there. One of my callers has talked last week about that pathological fear. And this is what happened at the cusp of slavery. There's a pathological fear that happens, and that fear is very, very paralyzing. So even though blacks were free in America, Rosa Parks' grandparents were free, her mother was free, there was still a lot of turmoil, a lot of killings, a lot of private things that happened to African Americans, and there was no one to blame. There was no one, because everything was done in such secrecy. The same thing's happening there in Uganda now. No one feels safe, because they can leave their house to go to work and something can happen in the area where they're at that day and their lives can be over just that quick. So we have to be really, really careful when we talk about, a lot of the things that I talk about on this show is really to correlate and to help you to understand what happened in this country and what is going on in Uganda, right now at present day. Her mother was a teacher, so Rosa became a very educated child. Her mother taught her to read and write and do a lot of the things that she had to do before she ever went off to school. And one of the things that some of the children in Uganda will find very interesting is that at the time when Rosa Parks was a little girl going to school, schools were set up a little bit like they're set up now in Uganda. In some of the rural areas where you will go into a classroom and you'll have all age groups. And they all sit in one classroom and they're all taught by one teacher. Well, that was the way that she was taught as a child coming up. Now, we've already talked on American Connection about education in Uganda and what needs to happen there. And those things still need to happen, because when you look at Rosa Parks' life as a child, that was the norm back then. But we progressed and we moved forward. The same thing needs to happen in Uganda. Education shouldn't just be for the wealthy children whose parents can afford that, or who have family members outside of the country that can afford to send them to school. It should be for every child, and no child should have to sit in a one classroom room and have to study with children that are way below or way above them as far as their age goes. So, but that was her learning and that was her experience when she was very young. You also have to understand that at the point in time when Rosa Parks was coming up, she was born in Montgomery, Alabama. And one of the things that happened there and throughout the United States of America, even though slavery was over and blacks were free, we were still trying to find our way. We were trying to find our path. Laws were being reviewed, rewritten, and whatever for our cause. The struggle was still there because there was segregation of schools. Blacks and whites were not allowed to go to school together. The whites had their school, the blacks had their schools. If you went to a movie, the blacks had to pay and go around back upstairs, and that's where the blacks sat at to watch a movie, and the whites would just pay and just walk right into the movie theater. So the blacks would be at the top and the whites would be at the bottom. If you were, playgrounds were segregated. Blacks and whites could not swim in the same swimming pools together. Segregation means just what it means. It was a separation of two parties. If you wanted a drink of water and you were out in public, there was a fountain that said colored only, because during the time that Rosa Parks came up, we were considered colored people. That's why the NAACP says the advancement of colored people, because we were colored, then we went to blacks, and then we became African Americans here in the United States of America. So when if you were outside and you wanted to get water at any public facility, the fountain simply said coloreds and whites. And a colored was not allowed to drink out of a white fountain, nor would a white drink out of a colored fountain. They kept themselves totally separate from us. When you went to a restaurant, there were certain hotels we were not allowed to stay in at all. They were only for whites. And if there was a hotel that would take blacks, you would go in and you pay and you'd go around the back. There were certain restaurants at the time that Rosa Parks was coming up. When you went into a restaurant, you could order your food, and then when your food was ready, you could pay for it. And then when your food was ready, you had to go around back to get your food. You were not even allowed to sit in the restaurant to eat. Now, understand what I'm saying. You had to pay the same price as the whites to eat, but they got to sit in the restaurant and eat. You paid your money. You stood outside. When your food was ready, they would call you, and you could go around back and pick up your food. So the separation, Rosa Parks came up in a time when segregation was really, it was really we were right on the cusp of it. We were right on the cusp of it. And let me explain something to you. When our Pledge of Allegiance to our flag has been the Pledge of Allegiance for hundreds of years. And our Pledge of Allegiance says this: I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and justice for all. How was there justice for all when these were the things that were happening to Black Americans at this particular time when Rosa Parks was coming up? And you have to understand, she was arrested for the bus incident that happened there in 1955, at which time she was 42 years old. So if we go back to all the way when she was a young child, you can still understand and see that even though slavery was over, we were starting to experience our freedom and move forward. We had a Pledge of Allegiance to our flag, which stated that there was freedom and justice for all. But as we go through her story and what she had to face at that particular time, you can see that there really was not the freedom and justice for all. Ugandans feel the same way because they're being told that there's a freedom and there's a justice, which we know that that is not true. And the same thing happened with Rosa, which made her question that later on in life too, as she got older. Where is the freedom and the justice for all? Because blacks, it took years and years and years and years of lobbying and law changes to make that come into effect, which is why the NAACP had to be formed to help legislate and bring those changes to the Congress and to the forefront to fight for the advancement of colored people, which is the same thing that we're talking about now that has to be done with FADU, the Alliance for Democracy and Development in Uganda. These things have to be set up because it's a way of fighting and protecting yourself as a whole and as a group. Otherwise, one voice is not enough to be heard. White supremacy was very, very predominant. It was very predominant. White supremacy was a way of them separating us out. We had no freedom to roam, and we had no freedom to do a lot of the things that we wanted to do. Now, it was not as bad as apartheid in South Africa was. But anytime you have a group and you exploit them in this way, there's hurt and there's anxieties and there's frustration that comes from that. No matter what you call it, whenever a people are being suppressed for who they are, freedom, liberties have been taken away. Now, she went on to be a pioneer for civil rights, but she didn't set out to do that, because she was asked, what made you stay in your seat and not get up? And she said simply, I was tired. I was tired. And I think we all get to a point like that in life where we're just tired. This can't continue to happen. You can't continue to ask us to live like this. It just, it's not fair, because when the law was, the laws that were set up, it's very, very interesting that if a white person wanted to say, well, that's stupid, you can't do this or you can't do that, they would simply challenge the laws to be changed. And they would challenge the law at a time where the law was very fragile in the United States of America. Because you got to think about it. In the 1920s and the 1930s and 1940s, the laws were very, very fragile in the United States of America. And a group of people could get together and say, we don't want this, or this is not right, or this is not the way this should be, or whatever. And lobbyists would come in and the laws would just be changed. Kind of like what's happening to the Ugandan people right now. Right now, the Constitution says that they have these freedoms of speech. It says they have freedom of the press, the freedom to protest and assemble, but they don't, because now they're wanting to change those laws to make it read in such a way that if they do this, they're somehow breaking the law. It's like my caller was saying last week when we were talking about Stephen Biko, and in 1961, when the law was changed that said that anyone speaking out against the government and apartheid was considered terrorists. And he was right in saying that if Nelson Mandela had been doing what he was doing at the time that law had been put into place, I think it was 1960 or 61, he could have lost his life. It would have been considered the death penalty, not life in prison. So the right to change the laws to make it favorable to the lawmakers and those that are in power is wrong. And at some point in all of our lives, we have to stand up for ourselves and say, I'm tired, like Rosa Parks said, and we're not going to take this anymore. It's what the NAACP is doing for African Americans in the United States. It's what FADU wants to do for Ugandans. Because you can't keep rewriting and changing and structuring things in the favor of the government, because then the government rules and the people have no rights, the people have no say. And if you're saying that the people have rights and the people have a say, then what would be the need to change the law? So I just wanted to give you a little bit of the background for her, as far as, because I want you to understand what she came through. It wasn't just enough what happened on the bus that started the civil rights movement. It was her grandparents born into slavery, her mother being born on the cusp of the freedom, when, and then it was Rosa coming in after that. So she grew up with stories. She grew up understanding. She grew up being aware of killings, of mobs, of things that were happening to colored people. She listened to stories from her grandparents. She understood and she knew how her parents felt. This is why I was saying on one of my earlier programs that parents in Uganda and everywhere, we have to be careful about what we say and how we raise our children. We have to be careful about what our children see and what our children are viewing, especially there in Uganda, because our children listen to us way more than we know that they do. Rosa Parks is a prime example of that. She understood and she knew the hurts and the frustration and the anxieties that her family line had come down through. And those things, those memories and those conversations lived with her throughout her life. Throughout her life. And I think at a certain point when she was young, well, sometimes when our children are younger, there's not a whole lot they can do to change their situations. So we have to make sure that we're protecting them, and we have to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to make sure that they're protected and to make sure that they understand and make sure that they know what's going on. Allow them the right to talk about situations, talk about what's troubling them, and talk about why something is right or wrong. It's not just enough in Uganda for children to see their friends being shot accidentally or killed, or mobs or rioting, because these army men, they don't care who's in the crowds and they don't care what's going on. And we need to explain these things to our children, because the youth in Uganda will be the future of moving that country forward. They've already proved to be this, and we know that this is what's going to happen in Uganda as things move forward. Rosa Parks refusing to get up on that bus on that one day was an event that started what would be the beginning of a modern civil rights movement. Like I explained to you before, that blacks and whites had different bathrooms. They couldn't use the same bathrooms, couldn't eat at the same restaurants, couldn't sit together in movies. They had black and white sections for everything, and schools were segregated. So everything was separate. So when they went to catch the bus, which the majority of African Americans are blacks back then, they were called colored people. I'm going to call them what they were called back then. They were colored people, but you will understand that they were African Americans. When they went to ride the bus was the same way. And most colored people did not have vehicles, because it wasn't a time when colored people made that much money. I mean, they worked for 3 cents or a nickel a day, an hour. And we know that that's not enough money to move yourself forward quickly. As time went on, of course, the pay rates went up and everything, but it would be years and years and years later before African Americans could make the same amount of money as whites, because whites were considered supremacy. So they made more money than blacks, even if they worked in the same job. Those were civil rights that we had to fight for later on down the road. But it was nothing to have two people that did the same job. And whether they were male or whether they were female, if they were black and white, they didn't make the same amount of money. So catching the bus was something that colored people did a lot back then. And if they didn't have money to catch the bus, they basically would walk to work or walk wherever it was they needed to go. This is what would happen. When the bus would stop to pick them up, they walked on the bus, they put their money in, they got off the bus, went around to the back door, and got on the bus in the back, because there was a line drawn on the bus. And it's interesting how these lines keep coming up, because I would talk about the line being drawn in the sand on my very, very first program that I ever did here on Voice of Uganda Radio. But there's a line, and that line, there were no blacks allowed in front of that line. So when they paid their money, they could not even walk down the aisle to the back of the bus, because they were considered to be in the white section of the bus. They had to pay their money, get off the bus, go around to the back door, and get on the bus there. They were behind the line. They were in their section. And that was considered their section, and that's where they had to be. So now that I've got this picture in your mind of not only did they have a certain place that they could sit on the bus, but they were not even allowed to walk through the bus to get to their section. This was, when we talk about separation and segregation, it was to the worst degree that you can ever think of. So she went around the back and she got on the bus and she sat down. Bus takes off, stopping to pick people up. The bus continues to fill up in the white section, but in the black section, there's still seating. So when the bus filled up, and at the third or fourth stop, and there was no more room for whites to sit, the bus driver stands up and says, "You guys need to move back, because these seats are for whites now." But you got to understand what I just said. There's a line drawn there. And that section is for blacks. It's not for whites. It is for blacks. This is what I mean by the law. Even in Uganda right now, everything has changed So for the convenience of everyone except the people. And this is what we have to stand up for. You can't continue to change the laws in the favor of the government and forget about the people that the laws were put in place to protect. This was a law. So a couple of the black ladies got up. Now, we know in modern days, in today's society, a man should always stand up and give a seat to a woman. I don't care if he's black or white. A woman should never have to get up out of her seat for a white man. And this was not a white female. This was a white male that she was getting out of her seat to give. But this day she said no. She said no. She said, I'm not getting up out of my seat, and she refused. So at this point, the bus driver makes all the blacks get off the bus. He calls for backup and he calls for help. And, of course, the cops come, and they question her a little bit about, what was going on. And she said she was tired and she was not giving up her seat. She paid her money. She was on the bus. She was sitting in the proper section. It wasn't like she sat in a white section like history wrote. Well, they made her move because she was in the white section. She was not in the white section. She was in the black section. And she moved, and she refused to move, so they arrested her. Well, when they arrested her, that is what spread it like a wildfire. And it spread it because there were other whites there there were other blacks there that knew what had happened. And they started saying, Rosa got arrested, Rosa got arrested. Well, the reason they were worried about Rosa Parks when she got arrested, it was not so much because of the arrest. They knew what they did. Sometimes people would be beaten or tortured, or things could happen to them when they were arrested and when they refused to abide by the law. So they were concerned more for her safety, that it spread it the way that it did, more than anything else. She was also known because most people knew in the community that she was a secretary for the NAACP. Some could say, well, the reason she didn't give up her seat was because she worked for an organization that she knew would protect her or whatever. But the NAACP was very, very young at that time. They were just starting out. So even though they had power, and even though it was moving and growing very rapidly and very fast, and people knew what it was, it still did not have the protection power that it has in today's society. Today's society, it has a lot more protective power than it did during the time of Rosa Parks. Because you have to remember, this was 1955 and she was 42 years old. And let me iterate on that just a little bit. She was 42 years old when she made her stand for herself. Sometimes we think, oh, it's the young people's fight. Oh, it's someone else's fight. Oh, I'm not going to get involved for whatever reason. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what's going on in your life. We all have to stand up at some point in some time. I don't care if you're 5. I don't care if you're 10. I don't care if you're 20. Steve Biko, at the time that Nelson Mandela was arrested and imprisoned on Robben Island, Steve Biko was 10 years old. So he still knew at that time that things were wrong, and those wheels had already started going in his head that this is not right, and it wasn't right that Nelson was arrested. It wasn't right that a lot of things had happened. So whether you're 10, whether you're in your 20s, whether you're in your 40s or your 50s, when the time comes and you know that your rights are being violated, you have to stand up for your rights. Just like those who are in Uganda right now with the rioting and everything that's going on, you have to stand up for your rights, because if you don't start fighting for yourself, no one else will. No one else will. So, it's interesting that, so when the cops come in and they arrest her, of course, the bus driver, because he was the one pressing the charges against her, he had to go down and sign all the papers that, yes, she violated the law and whatever. Really, if you think about it, at the time she did this, she really hadn't violated any laws, because that was segregation, meant that they had their section and the whites had their section. But because the bus had filled up, the driver felt she had to get up out of her seat. He wanted the whites to be able to sit down. So, That's why I encouraged, I think it was on a program or two programs ago when I was talking about the Constitution there in Uganda, and I encourage Ugandans to go out there and get a copy of the Constitution. You can get it off the internet and read it to see what the laws are and how the law protects you according to your rights there in Uganda. Because we all have rights, and we deserve the liberties and the justice to be able to stand up for those rights. So, of course, the driver filled out the complaint, and she was arrested, and, of course, it went to trial. The message got back to Dr. King because the public responded immediately, and the NAACP was on board. I mean, everything moved very, very fast. Once she was arrested, there was a meeting. Dr. Martin Luther King, of course, was a young minister at the time. He had been speaking out, but he had not become as big and as powerful as he would later become, because his movement really started here in 1955 when this happened to Rosa. But Dr. King became very, very powerful in the 1960s. Now, people were aware of him. People knew who he was because he had started making speeches. He had started standing up for civil rights for blacks. He had started to make his voice heard, but he was mostly a minister. And where he was making his voice heard was in his church. I want to just say here for a minute that, we all have our faith. We all have a God that we pray to. We all have a God that we believe in. Some of us, we all have a different name that we call our gods, or the spiritual entity that feeds our soul. Faith was a big thing in the colored, the black, and the African American community. People congregated because what happened is not everybody could afford to go to therapy, to sit and talk to a therapist about how they were being treated, their injustices, or whatever. So the way that Black Americans got their counseling is to go to church and listen to the minister every Sunday. And the spiritual movement was just as big as the civil rights movement, because spiritually people would be uplifted, and they went to church on Sundays, and that's where they got their motivation to get through the week. They got their motivation through their faith and through their religion and through their relationship with God. And so Dr. King used his platform in his church. He was a minister of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church there in Montgomery. He used his platform as a way of communicating to the people about their liberties, about their justice, and about their rights. And he used spiritual terminology to help the people rally up and understand what was happening to them and what was going on. So the day that she was arrested, all the African Americans formed together there at Dr. Martin Luther King's church to discuss what they were going to do, what had happened, why this had happened. And they all knew that it was racial bias. They all knew, because there was supremacy. The white supremacy ruled over everything, and they knew that what they were doing to this particular woman was wrong. The Ugandans there in Uganda have to understand, this was one woman who one day just got tired and said, I'm not moving from my seat, I'm going to sit here. And look at how the community rallied behind her and got on board. This is the same rally and this is the same movement that we're trying to bring about here at Voice of Uganda Radio with the people in Uganda as well as those who are outside of Uganda. We have to let our brothers and sisters know inside the country that we have to rally behind them. They are not standing alone, that we know what's going on, and we are going to stand behind them and protect them in whatever way we can by making our voices heard, making sure that congressmen like Chris Coons and like other publicists and freelance writers who are going into Uganda to cover these stories and see what's going on there, we're standing behind you. Rosa Parks, when she was arrested that day and taken off the bus, she had no idea the support that she had behind her. She just knew that she had to stand up for her rights. This is what I'm saying to the Ugandans that are there in Uganda now. This is not a time to be silent. It is not a time to be silent. It's a time to stand up for your rights, stand up for your liberties, and stand up for your justice. We hear you. We hear you loud and clear. We understand and we know that's why this memorial video is getting ready to run here really soon. Because we want to put a face to all the pain and all the torture of what's going on there in Uganda. We want it to run on YouTube because we want the world to see. We want them to understand and we want them to know what's happening to Ugandans there in Uganda. So pass the word on. Any of you who are listening to the program in Uganda, Voice of Uganda Radio, FADU, the Federal Alliance of Democracy and Development in Uganda, we know what's going on. And we are standing behind you. Like the blacks stood behind Rosa Parks in America, one woman who made a decision one day that she was tired and she wasn't going to take it anymore, became one of the biggest became one of the biggest icons in America. They call her the mother of the civil rights movement. Because we were fighting for our civil rights and our justice and our liberties, but not to the degree that this happened. I've got a call that's coming through now, so I'm going to see if we can go ahead and pick up this call. Caller, are you there? Caller, are you there? I think I dropped my caller. Maybe they'll call back. Let me just see if they're there. Caller, are you there? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hi, are you there?
Hello?
Hi, go ahead, caller, are you there?
Hello?
Hello, caller, we hear you, please. Go ahead.
Yes, Miss Brenda, thank you so much for your program. It's really very, very informative and very educative. My name is Musana, and one of the co-hosts on Gwanga Muje, which comes in at 9 in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays. I do appreciate what you are trying to do to help us. You as an American person, we as Ugandans, we need to have an obligation, actually a duty, to make sure that we take liberating our country very, very seriously. As you've said earlier in the program, a lot of Ugandans at home, they have done what they could. They have come to the streets. Some of them have lost their lives. And as you said, Mr. Taylor, the American journalist, also paid the price by being imprisoned. But what have we done, we as Ugandans, outside Uganda? It is a shame that we are outside and other people, specifically Americans, foreigners, are doing whatever they can to help us, liberate ourselves. As I said, Mr. Taylor was imprisoned, and I think from what we've seen on the video, even the American embassy was not in a hurry to get him out. And this shows that we need to do whatever we have to do as Ugandans. We should not be on the sideline, because those people at home in Uganda, they have paid the price, and they are crying out for help. But for us who are free, who are outside the country, who can talk, who can do whatever we want to do, we are not doing anything to make sure that our brothers and sisters are not suffering alone. So my question to you, what do you think Ugandans outside the country, do you think they are doing enough? Do you think they are doing whatever they have to do in order to help our people, our friends, our brothers and sisters in Uganda who are right there at the front line? Why are we Ugandans so reluctant? And you guys who are not Ugandans have paid the price. Some of you, and you are there on the airwaves calling us to come and unite and be behind you, and we are not doing what we are supposed to do. What do you think of Ugandan community outside Uganda? Are we just being naive, or we are just waiting to see what's happening? I'll hang up and listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the caller that just came through. Let me just say this. Taylor Cross, who was just arrested there for going in and filming the riots and what was happening there in Uganda, put his life on the line. Us that are getting involved in what's going on, we're starting to be recognized. Our government is saying, are these people, because the Ugandan government is going to say, these people are terrorists. They're coming in to destroy our country. They're coming in to do things. They're coming in to corrupt our country. When you as Ugandans know that that's not what we're trying to do. Whenever there's a label put on doing good, someone's going to always put a label on it to make it look like you're doing something bad, when that is actually not the case at all. One of the things I want Ugandans to understand and know, I talked about this in one of my earlier shows when I talked about how the world got on board when the campaign started to free Nelson Mandela. Americans will stand behind the Ugandan community, but the Ugandan community has to start the ball rolling. You're going to have to be a part of this fight, because if you're not, it will fizzle out and it will die. Right now, the Ugandan government is saying, oh, this is just another radio station. They'll get tired because nobody in Uganda cares. Nobody's going to get on board. We've got the fear of the people, like one of my callers talked about, pathological fear. Ugandans are not going to do anything because they know their family members are here and they know that we'll make it tough for them. I'm here to tell you, my fellow Ugandans, it may not be your family members today, but it will eventually be your family members. And now is the time to move. Now is the time to act. We cannot be silenced. We cannot sit aside and allow those who are on the front line to be hurt. We're having to do a couple of legal issues on this video before it runs, but I think it's going to be coming up here soon, probably in the next week. When you look at that video and you see the faces of these people and what is happening to them, you can no longer sit aside in silence. All the legalities that are having to be done, the legalities to set up Purdue, the legalities to set up this video so it runs without problems, so that we get it set up so it runs out on YouTube, the legalities to set up all these websites, to get information and all this stuff out there for you. We are a small community of people who are funding all of this. We have not asked anything of the Ugandans, inside, outside, anywhere. When we come to you, please don't make us into beggars, because we're not beggars. Because we have contributed to this cause. We have put our money in timelessly to make sure that we get everything up and running, and that we get things up and running legally. Because the only thing that is going to protect us is for things to be done legal. We have set up areas on our Facebook, on our websites, when you go out to donate money, to make all of those sites secure, as if you were going on a shopping website shopping. You put your information in there, nobody knows who you are. Our sites are just as secure as those sites, and they have not come without a lot of money and sacrifice for people who have been setting these things up. You cannot ask the American people to continue to fight a fight and put monies in for your causes when you're just going to sit back to see what is going to happen. It is not our country. Our country is running pretty smoothly right now. Yes, we still have our problems. Yes, we still have our fights. But what we are trying to do is come on board to help the Ugandan people. It is not a time, my friends, to be silent. I don't care whether you give $5. I don't care if you pledge $20 a month. I don't care what it is you do. But all of these programs, in order for them to run, they're not putting money in anybody's pockets. Because we ourselves who are setting all this up are paying out a lot of funds to make sure that these things run legally, properly, and correctly. Because they have to run for the people in Uganda. And when our country because all these programs will be setting up here in the United States. When our country comes back to look at these things, they're going to look to see if legally we handled the documents and we did everything the way it's supposed to be done. When they look and they see that legally we put out all the money, we put out all the funds to make sure that everything was set up legally, our country is going to say they're just another organization. And nothing can be done to them because they're another organization. But people, my friends, I'm telling you, none of this stuff is free. And it's costing. And these are the things that we're asking for your donations for. We're not asking for your donations for anything other than to get these things up, get these things running, and start the things that we want to have the ball to rolling in the direction that we need for it to start rolling. So when you have freelance writers from America going in to cover things in Uganda, it's because we know that the injustice is there. We know what's going on. And we know that somebody has to bring this information out. We are risking our lives to go into a country that will arrest us. And our embassy will our embassy will get us out. But our embassy is not going to get us out swiftly and quickly, because our embassy has to go through legal courses also. And our embassy has to also respect the Ugandan government to say, okay, we're going to take our person out. They won't take anything with them, and we're going to put them on a plane back to America. And they get us out of that territory. But you have to understand that lives are being risked to get in there to get this information, and to get this information to the Ugandan people who are outside of the country. And you Ugandans who are outside of the country, you know very well what's going on inside Uganda. We don't have to report this to you, and we don't have to tell you what's happening inside your own country, because you know what's happening inside your own country. So to get on board with FADU, to start an organization to legalize a campaign that runs solely for the Federal Alliance for Democracy and Development in Uganda, I'm telling you, my friends, it can become as big as the NAACP is here in the United States of America. But it is not going to happen without us funding it and moving it forward and making it as big as it can get. Because now when something happens in Uganda, they're going to say, let's see what FADU thinks about this. Let's see what FADU feels about this. Let's see what their own organization that they set up have to say about this. This organization becomes the voice not just for the Ugandans that are inside of Uganda, but it becomes the voice for all of Ugandans. And when the press picks up and interviews start happening, they want to know this stuff, we have a platform that we sit on. That's just like the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that was set up for African Americans here in the United States of America. My fellow Ugandans, I'm telling you, this is not the time to be silent. And if you sit still now, you may never have a chance to move forward again. Because when the Americans realize that you're not on board and not willing and ready to fight for your own country and your own rights by backing a company that is willing to set up an organization to stand up for the Ugandan people, when they see that you're not willing to do this for yourself, we will not fight this fight forever. And it will become silent again. The lights will be turned off on Uganda. And your sitting president knows that this will happen if the Ugandan people don't get on board. He's sitting back waiting for this to just fizzle out as another thing that has come to the forefront, but he knows the Ugandan people are not going to get on board. We cannot ask the Ugandan people inside the borders of Uganda to fight this fight by themselves. We cannot ask them to fight this fight by themselves. We have to stand up with them and fight this fight with them. We have to make their voices heard. Voice of Uganda Radio is not going to just be able to do it on this radio station. That's why we went through the channels and are going through the channels right now to set up this alliance, the Federal Alliance of Democracy and Development in Uganda. It's being set up to be the voice of the Ugandan people. It's being set up to put the voice out there and to put it on the radio and to put it on the airways and to put it everywhere so that the government knows that the people outside of Uganda know what's going on inside of the country, and they're not going to stand for it anymore. You have to stand up for Uganda. You have to stand up for Uganda's rights and the rights of those that are living there. We cannot ask the ones that are there to continue to put their lives out on the front line and that we continue to sit back to see what's going to happen. They will be slaughtered, they will be killed, and they will die. My friends, I'm telling you, every time I have to go back and we do edits to this video that's coming out, it will break your heart to see what is happening to the Ugandan people. It will literally break your heart. I remember doing the marches in civil rights when they would open up those of you who are familiar with the fire hydrants. When the firemen hook up to those fire hydrants and they open up the water on those hoses, that water hits with a pressure that almost makes you feel like your skin is being peeled away from your body. It hurts. That's the way they tortured us, but they tortured us with water. In Uganda, the tear gas and the chemicals that they are spraying on people in innocent assemblies, that stuff is nerve damaging. The way it burns and aggravates the skin, it is nerve damaging. And yet you will see it on this video time and time again where innocent people are being sprayed with this stuff. If you don't think it's hurting, go to any store and get some you can get pepper spray from any store. Get a little can of pepper spray and just sit there and spray it on your skin. Just find a little area on your hand and spray it on your hand. And tell me how that feels after 1 second after it hits your skin. It feels like your skin is on fire, but the flame is invisible. You cannot see the flame, but you know that you're on fire. And they are spraying this stuff on people in Uganda, just spraying it on them. And we are going to sit aside here in whatever country we're in throughout the world, not just in the United States of America, but throughout the world. We're going to sit aside and we're going to say, I'm just going to wait to see what's going to happen. Please, I don't want you to take anything that I say and just say, oh, well, whatever. I want you to go to the store, really, and you can buy this pepper spray at any outdoor place where you buy outdoor equipment and just spray it. Just find a small section and spray it on yourself and see what it feels like. And yet people are being sprayed with this stuff all the time. And they're being sprayed in their face. They're being sprayed on their bodies. And they're in the middle of the town. It's hot in Uganda. It's dusty. There is no water. There's no way for them to get this off of their skin. And it is burning. And you're telling me that we're in the comfort of our homes and we're looking at this stuff and we think that that's okay? My friends, I'm telling you, it is not okay. And I don't know any of these people directly. But when I look at these videos, I cry for each and every one of them because I can feel the pain of what is being done to these people. I know what tear gas and I know what those pepper sprays, I know what those things feel like. And they do not feel good. And we cannot continue to sit aside and say that this is okay for these people to be treated this way and for these people to go through this. Please, my Ugandan family throughout the world, I am begging you. We can no longer sit aside and allow this to happen. Fadu is being set up for a reason. It has to stand on a legal platform. On a legal platform, it gets the notoriety that it needs to have in order to move forward. And there's no room and there's no time in life right now for doubters. If you doubt this, then you're not truly a Ugandan and it's not your problem anyway. But there is no room right now in life for us to doubt the things that are being set up and the things that are being put in place. My friends, everyone who goes on these stations during the week and on the weekends are doing this for love of the country. They're not doing it for anything for themselves other than love of the country and what the Ugandan people are going through right now. All the Ugandan people are going through right now. If you knew right now that you could go in Uganda, let's just go back and let's go back from last Sunday. If you knew that right now you could be Harriet Tubman and you could sneak into Uganda and bring a Ugandan out, would you do it? Would be the question. Would you be willing to go in there and bring that one person out? I have to say, if I was put on a platform and given the opportunity to do that, and I knew that I could go in and successfully come out with one person, even though you have millions of people who are suffering, I would go in to take that one person out. Someone said once, a friend of hers was walking on the beach, and all of these starfish had washed up on shore. They were feeding close to the shorelines, and they were way, way too close to the shoreline. So what was happening is, as the tide came in, it washed them up on shore. And starfish are just like fish. They can't live outside of the water. They have to be inside the water to live. And there were thousands of them all on the shore. So this person went out there and she was throwing them back in the water. And this guy came across and he said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "These starfish, they've all washed up on shore. I'm throwing them back in water." He goes, "But there's thousands of them. You can't get all of them back in the water. They're going to die." And she said, "Yeah, but that one that I just threw back didn't." So when we look at a situation, it can be as big as all of these thousands of starfish that are washed up on shore. But that one starfish that she picked up and threw back in the ocean, it mattered to that one starfish. When Harriet Tubman went back into slave territory to bring slaves into freedom, she could only bring 3, 4, 5 people at a time, but it mattered to those 3, 4, or 5 people, even though there were thousands and thousands of people still in slavery. The reason I share that is everything has to start on a small scale. So please don't just look at this and say, this is a small scale. There's nothing we can do. It's them against us. This is why we're trying to form a platform that we can all stand on and stand behind together. Everybody's not going to know your name. Do you think the NAACP, you know everybody who relies on and looks at the NAACP for anything? The NAACP is set up there so that when injustices happen, that's the first place the media goes. That's the first place that people go to ask the questions. How does the NAACP looking at this, or how are they viewing this, or what's their stand on this? This is what FADU does. It stands and represents the Ugandan people. But I'm telling you, this is not a time to stand by and be silent. This is not the fight of the American people, but the American people can no longer stand aside in silence and allow this to happen. I had the opportunity to show the memorial video that's going to be running soon to a couple of people. And I encourage you to tune in on Wednesday because I'm going to have one of my first interviews with someone who viewed this, an American, and had no idea that this was happening in Uganda. Had no idea and just could not believe it. Because this is the problem. There are things happening in the country that no one else knows about. There's no platform. There's nothing to go to say anything. For our senator, the senator of Delaware, Chris Coons, to go in and say that the government in Uganda has erosion. The very things we fight for in America for people it's collapsing in Uganda. Those type of statements, when they make those type of statements, everybody hears it, but then it dies out after 3 to 5 days. What FADU does is we come in and we keep these type of conversations alive. We get in touch with those senators' offices and we say, this is who we are. And we want to know what the senator stands for on this and that and whatever. We keep the issues alive. If somebody makes a statement about Uganda in the media because something has happened or something that they're aware of, We step in as an organization and we keep those things alive and we keep those things moving. Because what's happening right now is the conversation comes out, it's there, and it dies. And we don't want these things to die. We need these things to remain in the media. We need these things to remain in the minds of Americans. We need people to ask the questions of what's going on and why is this happening. And then we need to be here to answer the questions for them so that we keep this alive and we keep it moving and we keep it going. NAACP stood behind Rosa Parks. That's why this civil rights movement became so big, because the organization was there behind her. You think of one woman refusing to give up her seat, they could have just thrown her off the bus and the story would have been over. But when you have an organization that stands behind you, then they can't just do that. Questions have to be answered because questions are asked. When the organization here that we're trying to form up, the Federal Alliance for Democracy and Development in Uganda, will be that organization. That these things can't happen without someone being there to answer the questions as to why these things are happening. We have to shine a light. We have to shine the light so that they will know what's going on in Uganda, because we know right now that the Ugandan government is getting ready to crack down on social media there in Uganda. But I tell you, my Ugandan family, do not fear and do not be afraid. You still have to stand for your rights. Here in America, we see, we understand, and we know. And we will keep your stories alive, and we will keep your stories on the air, and we will do whatever it is we need to do to make sure that we can continue this fight moving forward. The interesting thing about Rosa, when she was arrested on that day, everybody boycotted the buses on that day, and no one rode the buses. And this wasn't the real boycott that started against the buses, but this happened on this one particular day. The interesting thing about boycotts is what happened in South Africa as well. When they had the strike and they didn't go to work, they didn't take the trains into the township for those 3 days standoff, it makes a loud noise because we are massive in numbers. When people look at us individually, they just see one person, one group, one whatever. But when they look at you overall, it takes notice. It happened in South Africa when they had their standoff. When we did the boycott here and no one rode the buses were basically empty. The buses were riding around and riding out gas that was costing the city money that it didn't even have because it was not making money from the people. They need us. The reason I'm saying that is for you to know that we are needed in a society that does not accept us, but we are needed. The blacks doing this boycott of the buses, even though they were treated inhumanly and indecently, I mean, really, to make them pay their money and then go back off the bus and walk around and come in the back door after they paid the same price as the whites to be able to walk through the bus and sit wherever they wanted to sit. But when they no longer had our money, it caused a huge financial problem for the state, because they were not making money and they could not afford to run those buses without the money. The reason I'm saying that is because, I don't want you to just look at Rosa Parks as being a civil rights, or being a big part of a civil rights movement. I want you to understand the impact of all that this one incident had on everything. The impact was huge. For a city to almost not even be able to run its buses because it's not making enough money for the gas that it takes to run the buses, from a group of people that it treated it treated like they weren't even human, like they weren't even a part of the society. We can make our voices heard. That's what they did with the boycott here in Montgomery, Alabama, that Dr. Martin Luther King led. And that's what happened in South Africa when they had the standoff for the 3 days and they didn't work. It was noticed. And it was noticed around the world, not just in their little area, because everybody's like, what the heck and what's going on? Things start on a small scale, but they don't have to stay on a small scale. Now, after she was arrested on December the 1st for that, 4 days later, she was, of course, found guilty. And, of course, the NAACP stood in to do an appeal, to file an appeal, and what happened in that is she still was found guilty, but they didn't make her pay any of the fines. When a country, when a company, when a group of people know that you have a foundation that stands behind you, it can lessen some of the repercussion of what can happen because of an incident or because of something that happened. This could have been a lot worse than it was if the NAACP had not been set up and was not in place to step in and intervene on why was this person treated this way and what's going on and what are we going to do about it. Because in America, we still give money to the Ugandan, to the country of Uganda. And we can stand up and fight for the rights of why are we giving money to a country that's causing these things and this torture and stuff to happen to people. I mean, we have more power than you think we have. We're just not acting on our power because of the faith, because of our fear. And there is no reason for Ugandans who are outside of the country living in exile to be in fear of that government. If you live in fear, you will be in fear forever, and your country will not move forward. The great thing that Rosa Parks had for her, because, sometimes we look at these heroic, iconic people and we think, wow, but I could never do that. One of the things these people had going for themselves is everybody was tired. Everybody was frustrated. From Gandhi to Mandela to Biko to Harriet Tubman to Rosa Parks, everybody was tired. But what they didn't realize is the rest of the world was tired too. And the rest of the world needed just one person to stand up and say, we're not going to take this anymore. And then the others stood behind them. And when they stood behind them, they made them stronger, more powerful, and bigger than they were. And that was the beauty of what happened with even Rosa Parks. Everyone stood together and they stood behind her. This is what needs to happen for the movement now here with Uganda. The only way we're going to stand strong is for you, wherever you're at and listening to my voice now, to say, I am tired. I don't want my country to be treated like this anymore. I want to someday be able to go back home to my country. I want the liberties of moving back and forth and not having all the frustrations and anxieties that I have now about my country. And I'm tired. And yes, it is time to fight. And give this program a chance to help move the Ugandan people forward. The only people that benefit from Voice of Uganda Radio is the people of Uganda. Taylor Crass, he didn't benefit. He got thrown in jail and then kicked out of the country. The same with Senator Chris Coons. He's not going to benefit from anything. He made his statement because that's how he felt about the situation. But now he's kind of faded away too. We are the ones that have to keep it alive. So I'm asking you, my fellow Ugandans, and those of you who are listening to my voice and a part of this Freedom at Hand show today, we are the ones that have to stand up, and we are the ones that have to make the difference. I promise you, if you start to stand together, if you start to support the cause, if you start to get actively involved, when that video starts running, let people know it's out there, because the more hits it gets, the more viral it gets. We have to start this fight. It may just be one little group of people, but it can grow into a massive group of people for change that can change the face of the world and the way people see what's going on there in Uganda. We have to do that. We have to do that. And it's interesting because, when Rosa Parks was interviewed later, she said, did you ever imagine that you would have the reaction of the people that you had? And she said, no, I didn't. She said, no, I didn't. And the interesting thing about us is we are here in social, this is social media is incredible as to the people you can reach, as to how the vastness of how far it can go out to bring people on board and make them a part of the conversation. And yet we have to beg for support and beg for people to get on board. When Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, there were maybe 10 to 15 other Black people on the bus that put that word out there, and it spread it. And it was not even as massive as the internet or radio stations or what we have in our hands today to fight a cause. And here in the 21st century, with all that we have and all of the ways in which we can have and make this big and start up an organization for movement to move forward, and yet we have to beg people to get on board. Let me ask you this. Do you not think that what was going on in the lives of these people at the time that it was going on, do you not think that these people had fear? Pathological fear. Because let me explain to you, like I was talking about Rosa Parks, we have to understand that, when this happened in 1955, she was 42. So when she was a little girl, she was still used to the Ku Klux Klan killing and torturing and burning Black people to death. So please don't think this was easy for any of the iconic people who are out there. They all had the same fear that we have today. Our fear is no different than the fear that they had back then. They just channeled their fear into an energy that moved them forward. Let's not be paralyzed by our fear, because right now I feel like a lot of Ugandans are paralyzed by their fear. You cannot allow that fear to rule the way you move forward in the country. And we move forward with what we're trying to do to help the other Ugandans to be able to move forward. We cannot do that. Channel that fear in a way to make change. Channel that fear in a way to make a difference. Because I'm telling you, my friends, if we can't get you guys to get over the fear, we're dead in the water. Before we ever really get going, we're going to be dead in the water. Because you're going to have to channel that fear in a different way. When we tell you to go out there to our website and be a part of contributing to the cause, nobody's going to see anything or have anything on you. There's nothing out there. All that stuff disappears just like it does when you go out online and pay your bills or you go out and you do anything else. But this is a cause worth fighting. This is a cause worth bringing the attention of the American people, the people in the United Kingdom, the people in Amsterdam, the people in Canada, the people throughout the world. It's not just here in the United States. It's the world. It's the world that we're trying to get on board. It's the world that we're trying to make this all known. And for a day and age such as this is, there's no excuse for us not to be a part of a movement that could move forward to help the Ugandan people. It's, Dr. King, it's very interesting. He was a minister, and that's what he had his doctorate in. He was a minister, and he used his platform that he had. He didn't become the icon that he became because that's what he was trying to do. He became the icon that he became because he started to stand behind people who were putting their lives on the line, who were going through things that were very, very difficult, that needed a voice. He opened the doors of his church for meetings. When something happened or someone was arrested or someone was killed by a Klansman or things happened, people ran to him to say, Dr. King, this is what happened, or they've arrested this person or that person or whatever. And his voice, he became the voice of change to help people. The same thing when Rosa Parks was arrested. The first person they ran to was Dr. King. And because of that, that is what made him the great person that he was. Speaking up for injustice, we all have to do it. And we're all at risk to do it. Please don't think that I'm not at risk, because I'm at risk even here in my own country for standing up for what I believe is right, for going on the air and voicing my opinion about how I feel about what the Ugandan government does and how they're treating the Ugandan people. It will be nothing for the leaders in Uganda to go to the embassy there and say whatever they wanted to say about me. And sure, here in America, they put me under the radar and they would say, well, we'll monitor and see what's going on and we'll just go from there. None of us are safe. Whenever you speak out against injustice, there is always going to be barriers that you have to cross. The question is, are you willing to cross those barriers to help other people, to liberate other people, and to move them forward? For me, it's not a question of yes or no. It's just yes. And the Ugandan people need to be the same way. The answer should not be yes or no. It should just be yes. And everybody needs to step up and come on board to do what they need to do. Dr. King did it. He spoke up for injustice. Anytime there was an injustice, he spoke up for injustice. And those are the things that need to happen. We have to start standing up for the injustice that are happening. Because of that, they formed the Montgomery Improvement Association, where Dr. King was chosen as the head spokesman for this. Well, he not only was a head spokesman, but he was a president for this. Because in Montgomery, Alabama, during this time, there was a lot of things going on, a lot of strife, and a lot of things were taking place, and a lot of things were going on. And so even with the NAACP out there, which was becoming a huge organization, within communities, people still had to form their smaller communities for the injustice that was just happening within their smaller communities. Because this is what I'm trying to say to all of my fellow Ugandans that are listening. We have to form an alliance, because the alliance is what makes us big. It's what makes our voice heard. It makes us powerful. We're not asking anybody to get on the front line to fight this fight. There are people at Voice of Uganda Radio and other entities that are willing to stand up to fight, willing to go the mile. They don't care if their faces are put on TV, and they don't care about the media or whatever, to say what needs to be said on the behalf of the Ugandan people. But we need to know that we have an alliance. And we have to stand together to make these things work. That's why they're doing the Federal Alliance for the Democracy of Development in Uganda. You have to develop these things in order to be able to move forward. Dr. King was pretty powerful. He was becoming very, very powerful by the time they'd set up this movement in Montgomery. But even he still understood, and he knew that this needed to happen. The same thing happened with Steve Biko. The same thing happened with Nelson Mandela. Everybody knows that you've got to start an alliance, because that becomes the voice, that becomes the face. Because right now, the face of Uganda is the Voice of Uganda Radio. That's the face of Uganda. The legalities of the Federal Alliance for the Democracy and Development of Uganda, that will become the platform in which we can stand on to fight the issues that need to be fought for the Ugandan people. So, it's interesting because, one of the things that was very interesting about Rosa Parks, they asked her, they said, have you ever regret, what you did, the decision you made that day to stay in your seat on the bus? And she says, no. She said, I've never regretted it. And she says the only thing that she regrets about that day that she didn't get up was that she didn't do it sooner. What are our regrets? As a Ugandan family, united the way that we are, what are our regrets? And let's not let the regret be that we didn't stand up sooner. Rosa Parks, when asked the questions, do you have any regrets about that day? And Rosa Parks' comment was, I have no regrets. The only regret I had is that I didn't do it sooner. My friends, Freedom at Hand is not just here to fill in a 2-hour slot on a Sunday afternoon. It's here because freedom is at hand. Freedom is what we all share. Freedom is what we can all have. The question is, what will our regret be? That we didn't do it, or that when we decided to do it, that we didn't do it sooner? How many people have to die? How many people have to be tortured? How many people have to go through the injustice and be jailed and beaten and all the other the horrible things that are going on there in Uganda before you decide, today I will not stand up and give my seat away? And the only regret that I will have is that I didn't do it sooner. This is the time and this is the place. Rosa knew it when she stayed in her seat, that this is not justice and I'm not giving up my seat. We all, as Ugandans, know that an injustice is being done. Yet we stand by and we allow it to happen. Because that day on the bus, when the bus driver went to the back and said, you guys have to get up and give away your seats, 3 female ladies stood up to give up their seat. Rosa was the only one that didn't stand up. And they stood up with protests, but they stood up anyway. We cannot continue to allow the Ugandan government to tell us we have to give up our seats and we need to move farther to the back of the bus and stand so someone else can have the seats. You cannot allow this to happen. At some point, we have to stay seated for justice and for the right and the equality of what's happening to other people there, the other Ugandans that are still there in Uganda. How long? How long will we continue to let it go on? Rosa was 42 years old. She went through injustice for a long time. Let's not make the people of Uganda wait 42 years more before we stand up for justice for what's going on in Uganda. The time to stand up is now. This is not a time to be silent, but this is a time to stand up. Because all people, everybody should be free. Everyone should be free and have equal opportunities. Not just some people in Uganda deserve those rights, but everybody deserves those rights. Everyone. You know, the one thing you have to do to accomplish anything is to just believe. Just believe in yourself. Believe in your abilities to make a difference. Did Rosa Parks think that she'd make a difference that day? No. But she believed in the fact that she had rights to be in that seat and not have to move, and she stood firmly on that. Did Harriet Tubman think that because she made it to freedom that she was the only one entitled to that freedom? No, she felt like until everybody was free, she could not enjoy being free. What has happened to us that we have lost that side of us, that emotional side and that emotional feeling for other people? Where are the days of the people who could not rest because of the injustice in the world? They could not idly sit by and not be a part of a growth and a movement for change for the bettering of all people. What would have happened if Harriet Tubman never went back to get not one other slave, but stayed where she was at once she became free? And by the way, one of the trips she went back, she got her parents. She got her mother and her father. And when she went back to get her mother and her father, they said, we're not going. And she says, well, if you're not going, this is the night that I will be caught, because I will not leave you. So either you have 5 minutes. Either you're coming with me or I will be captured tonight. And they knew that she was serious. What are we doing to put our lives on the line? What are we doing to risk the well-being of other people? And we're not even taking risks like these people. We're not asking you to take a risk like Nelson Mandela. We're not asking you to take a risk like Steve Biko. You're not taking a risk like Harriet Tubman, nor are you taking a risk like a Rosa Parks. But you have to stand for justice and justice for all. And you know that what's going on in Uganda right now is not equally right and it's not fair. It's not. And so we have to, at the end of the day, look at ourselves and say, am I a part of the solution to the problem, or am I contributing to the problem? Because if we're not doing anything, we're contributing to the problem. And I tell you why I say that. The reason we're contributing to the problem is because we are saying that whatever they're doing over there is okay with us. Because if if you know that what you're doing is wrong by keeping silence and not being a part of a movement to move it forward, then you're only a part of the problem that is still happening there. You may not be the one with the gun in your hand. You may not be the one pulling the trigger on the pepper spray. You may not be the one with the stick in your hand that's beating someone to death. But if you stand on the side of the road, or if you look at a video, or if you see these things and you don't stand up for change, you are part of the same person that's creating that turmoil and that problem for others in a situation in which they shouldn't be in. So, pathways to freedom are not all happy and glorious with flowers down the pathway and a concrete pathway that you just kind of walk on to freedom. Freedom is a struggle. Freedom is walking through a swamp with alligators and snakes. Freedom is, the freedom path is not giving up your seat on a bus. The path to freedom is spending your life in prison, but like Nelson Mandela did. The path to freedom is being tortured like Stephen Biko was tortured. The path of freedom, I think sometimes it's Gandhi and all the things he went through until his death. The pathway to freedom is not a pleasant pathway to be on. It's not. It's paved with heartache and pain. The heartache and pain of the path to freedom right now is the Ugandans that are inside Uganda on the front line fighting every day for freedom, rights, liberties that the Constitution of Uganda says that they have. We are the ones that can clear that pathway. We are the ones that can make that pathway a little easier for them to travel on. Many more may die and a lot more things may happen before we really start to see things turn around. But we have to start somewhere. If Harriet Tubman went in and freed the first group of slaves she went in to free and freed no one else, she would have at least done something. So this is my plea to the Ugandan family, is that we all have to do something. We can't just sit aside and do absolutely nothing. Senator Chris Coons knows that from Delaware. Otherwise, he would not have made the comments that he made about the erosion. And you know what erosion is? Erosion is something that happens over time. So he understands and he sees that, yes, the people are still standing up for their rights. Yes, the people are still speaking out right now. But they will not speak. But that this is corrosion. It's slowly dying. And will we stand by and allow the people of Uganda to slowly die, to slowly become nothing, to make their fight and the reason for them losing their lives in vain? I don't think we can do that. I don't think we can do that. Taylor Cross is the same thing, He went in, and now he's out, and he's talking about his experience there in Uganda and what was happening and what was going on. And he talked about the riots and the people chanting for their freedom and protests, because of the things that are happening to them at the hands of the government. He's speaking out about those very, very things right now on media. And his voice, and the senator's voice, and my voice, and Voice of Uganda Radio, and all the other things that are being put in place to help us we have to start moving forward with these things. Being a superior reign over anyone is an injustice. The army, the police, the president, they don't have the right to do a lot of the things that are happening right now in the country. They just don't have the rights to do that. Ugandans have freedom of speech, of press. They have the freedom to protest, and they have the freedom to assemble. They're not doing anything wrong. They're standing up for their civil and their liberal rights, which the Ugandan Constitution says that they have. So either they have this or they don't. So I just, I plead with the Ugandan family to just really, search your heart, understand and know segregation is not good anywhere. Whether it's segregation between black and whites like it was in the United States during Rosa Parks growing up in Montgomery, segregation that happened in those times here in the U.S., whether it's apartheid and all the things that happened there in South Africa and everything that's going on with them, whether it was slavery way before Rosa Parks' time that things were taking place, or whether it's the things that Gandhi fought for their independence there in India. It's wrong. It's wrong. And we have to be willing to stand up for that and say that this is wrong, and I do not want to be a part of this, and I will not allow this to happen. We have to do that. And we have to be a part of those conversations that bring that to the forefront. I enjoy the fact that I have listeners. I enjoy the fact that people come on board to hear these stories of great, heroic, iconic people who faced their fears head on and did what they had to do anyway. But these stories are here as encouragement to say that we can do this, that it's been done before, that every fight is going to be hard. Every fight is going to be a struggle. But we have to become a part of the fight. We have to become a part of the conversation. And we have to do what it is that we need to do to move forward. Otherwise, we all just, we die right where we're at. We close our eyes and we pretend that nothing's going on. The genocide that happened there in Rwanda, when all those people were slaughtered and killed, innocent people, just slaughtered and killed. We cannot turn our backs and we cannot close our eyes when these type of injustices are happening. It hasn't even got as bad as it's going to get in Uganda. Because, my friends, I have a feeling it is going to get worse than it is at this present time. Because if it's escalating to the point that it is at this point, and it continues to grow, it will get worse. It will get far, far worse before it gets better. And we need to get ourselves set up, and we need to get ourselves going before the worst comes. Because if we don't, I'm afraid that we may be too late. You don't go out looking for car insurance when you've had an accident in your car. You look for car insurance before that happens. You buy the insurance and then you know that you're protected so that if anything like that happens, you're going to be fine. The same insurance that we have is to continue on with the work we're doing here at Voice of Uganda Radio to get FADU, the Federal Alliance of the Democracy and Development in Uganda, up and running and moving. We've got to put the protection in place to start to protect the Ugandan people so that we can all move forward and do what it is that we need to do. We have to do that. We owe it to all of those who are putting themselves out on the front line each and every day in Uganda, doing what they're doing. So I'm thankful for history. and all the people that have come forward to make a change and to make a difference in their lives. I'm very thankful for Rosa Parks, whatever her reasoning was on that day, that she was tired, or whatever her reason was. She didn't even have to have a reason for me. The fact that an injustice was being done and she stood up for herself was enough. And we have to start standing up for ourselves and for each other, and not look at our situations and be selfish because it's not happening to us. Because like I said, the situation and the things that are going on there in Uganda will get worse. They will not get better, my friends. I wish they were, but they will get worse, and there will be more killings, there will be more beatings, and they will keep it away from us as much as they possibly can. But we will get it. We will have it, we will find it, and we will know it's out there. And we will put it out there on our memorial page and anywhere else we can to allow the American people and the world to know what's going on. We will not be silenced, and we will not stand by and allow people to be killed and treated the way that they're being treated by a government and a country that says it's for the people, and a president that walks the streets and sees the bodies and sees the people and all the things that are happening, and with a look of disgust on his face. No sympathy at all for these people. That is not a president. A president is for the love of the people and the love of the country. The president should not be sending his army, nor should he be sending his police or anyone out in force to destroy or hurt the people of Uganda. His role is as the president, not as an assassin. And right now, he has traded in his hat as president of the country for the hat of being an assassin because of whatever he feels is happening behind his back or in front of him. The Ugandan people are just being themselves. They're tired and they want new leadership. And to speak out against that and say that we no longer want to be treated like that, there is nothing wrong with that at all. And to have a government that says this is wrong and you cannot do this and we will not allow this, and if you do this, we will kill you, where's the freedom in at that? We here at Voice of Uganda Radio are fighting for freedom at hand. We're fighting for freedom for the Ugandan people. We're fighting for their injustice. We're fighting to say that this can no longer happen and that we all have to start to move forward. So my plea to the Ugandans inside the country and outside of the country is to support Voice of Uganda Radio, to give, to be a part of it, so that we can be what we need to be for the Ugandans that are still there being tortured and killed every day. We can no longer be silent. We can no longer stand by and allow these things to happen. If we were there in Uganda, any of us that are listening to my voice outside of the country, if you were there in Uganda, would you want to know that someone outside of the country knows what's happening, knows what's going on, and is funding a program that can bring about some sort of change for your life there in Uganda? Sometimes it's hard to put yourself in those shoes when you're outside of the country and you're not a part of the pepper spraying and the attacks and the beatings and the shootings and all the things that are going on, because you're removed from that. But if I were in Uganda right now, I would like to know that someone is standing up and someone is fighting for my rights to be able to have liberties and justice there in my own country. I would like to think that somebody cares about me, cares about the struggle, cares about what's going on, and not that they're just there because they're removed from the situation and they have nothing to do with it. There are a lot of Ugandans that are outside of the country. There's a lot of Ugandans who set your lives up in other places. And that's fine. But Uganda is home. Uganda is home for most of you. And to say you're going to be in exile out of your country for the rest of your life because of the turmoil and because of the things that are going on right now, I guarantee you, I don't want to travel to Uganda right now because it's too unstable right now, and it's only going to get more and more and more unstable. This is your country. You got to fight for it. You got to fight to get it back. Because if you don't fight for it, I'm here to tell you, the American people will stand behind you. The world will stand behind you. But we won't stand there for long. The fight is yours, but we're willing to stand with you. And we're willing to fight, and we're willing to make the voices heard. We're willing to do what it is we need to do to shed light on the injustices of what's happening. The senator here in Delaware has done it. Taylor has done it, being arrested over there in Uganda. We're doing it here at Voice of Uganda Radio. And I thank all the Ugandans who are part of the radio station that are there in Uganda, because they take risks every day of their lives when they walk out the door. And they take risks listening to the program. But they listen to the program anyway, because they need that beacon of hope that somebody cares. And I don't want to be on this station begging Ugandans who are in the country to help, to support, and to move us forward when you have Ugandans in Uganda saying, yeah, help us, guys, help us. So stand up for the rights of Uganda. Let's do what we need to do to move the country forward. I thank you so much for being a part of the program here today. I didn't take a break because, well, it was not a day for taking a break. We just needed to move forward and move through that because there was so much to share and so much to talk about. But I appreciate each and every one of you for being a part of the program today, for being a listener and just being involved in whatever way you can. Please go out to our website and our Facebook page. I know they have lots of information that gets updated out there throughout the day, and be a part of donating and contributing to the station. We thank you so much here at Voice of Uganda Radio for being a part of the conversation today. On my program on Wednesday, The American Connection, I will have a 30-minute interview with another American talking about some of the issues from the video that we viewed. So I hope you'll be a part of that. Thank you so much for just being with me for these 2 hours. God bless you.